how do you keep up to date with whatever's going on in the technical world so that you can continue to interface with customers?
The best thing that I try to do is just study it myself. And then when it comes to communicating it to an executive or to a leader, I try to simplify it, right? Because some of these things that, our product developers and, UX and UI folks design, they can make it very complicated, right? Like you mentioned, just downloading an update to your iPhone, there's probably thousands of features that they released in that update. But what's important to an executive might be, 10 things. So I just try to simplify and focus on the top 10 things that might be important to their strategic plan. But it starts with me seeking that education and being able to communicate that as well. So that's where my passion comes in. So that's how I try to approach it when it comes to just dealing with the change and the things that are always happening in the technology industry.
Have you always wondered what a rewarding career in technology feels like? Then look no further. Join Technologists of Color as they interview some amazing people of color working in the tech space. Get to hear their stories and the advice they have to embark on your own successful career. Strap in and take a listen.
Welcome to ToC Presents Get to Know. I'm your host, Mark Lawson. Today's guest is Chance Mack. He's an account executive for Workday Higher Education, known as the sales executive. He's a podcaster, author, entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and one-on-one business coach. He has the motto, take chances. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Chance Mack.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity and I'm looking forward to being on the podcast.
Thank you for agreeing to do this. And, within that intro, there's a lot of commas in terms of what you do. And I'm definitely going to want to give you the opportunity at the end, right, to shout out all your social media, and we'll get to it. But Technologists of Color is really devoted towards helping African Americans get in the technology industry and improve their career. And one of the things that we want to highlight is that there are a lot of opportunities within tech that don't involve being technical in the sense of actually writing code or, detangling wires or connecting different things. That tech is an entire ecosystem, an entire industry, just like other industries that have several different parts that circulate in and around the technology itself. So as I mentioned in your opening, that you're an account executive with Workday. I'm familiar with Workday, but if you could give people kind of what it is to be account executive and what the Workday product is.
Absolutely. So if I think about what it is to be an account executive is obviously a sales based role. So it's a performance based role in which we are responsible for not only helping our internal team, but also the prospective customer evaluate the Workday platform and make a decision to purchase or procure Workday. And as it relates to what Workday is an enterprise cloud system for financials, HR, and student administration. So I work in higher education, so I sell to colleges and universities. But that's the overall elevator pitch on what Workday does. And we could spend months talking about what Workday actually does from an operational standpoint. But one key value prop is it helps institutions or organizations run their business more effectively and more efficiently in the cloud, which has a multitude of different benefits.
Right. So again, I implore anyone who's watching to check out Workday in terms of getting to know what it is so that they'll get a good understanding that, you are actually in the software industry. Like that's I would say that maybe 5-6 years ago, I remember being at an event and there was a woman who's an entrepreneur and a tech person, and she leaned over to me and said, "Hey, you need to know about this Workday product, right? Like there's a lot of consulting that was going on." And she was mentioning, that Workday was something that a lot of contracts were being bid on. And as you pointed out, it has to do with HR, and large organizations are using it, and there's always this time I feel that there's a convergence of new technology, and people go through this opportunity of kind of changing over. I remember when PeopleSoft, and before that Oracle, and and when a new piece of software comes out and it has all these great new functionalities, people want to take advantage of them.
Yes, sir.
So that's the software. Now the account executive component, the sales component, within a technology framework. Kind of tell us, your background, and bring us up to modern day as to how you got into that sales position.
Yes, sir. So, I mean, that's such a loaded question. I could spend the whole podcast talking about this. So, I guess what started me into the technology space was I went to Georgia State University. I initially studied public relations, but in my time studying public relations, I was doing a lot of internships in which, involved technology. I was working at Turner Broadcasting, which is now Warner, doing some internships there that always involved technology, being on the cutting edge of technology. And actually, I worked my way through school. So I worked at Sprint, which is a telecom business, which obviously leveraged cell phones and tablets. So I was always around technology, and I would just, meet different people from different industries, different walks of life, that sparked my interest. And I would always be curious about what was going on in tech. And mind you, tech wasn't what it is today. It wasn't as cool back in this time. It was just kind of like a means of doing business, or, a means of the future. But I was always curious in the industry, 10, 12 years ago, just because I thought it was always cutting edge, and that's something I wanted to be a part of. And once I graduated college, I got an opportunity to work at AutoTrader, which is a digital marketing company. That company was acquired by Cox Enterprises, or Cox Automotive. Exposed me to a lot of different technology working there as well. And long story short, I got an opportunity to join Workday. And that was my, I guess, official sales role was Workday. But prior to when I was working at Cox, I was in a sales operations role. So I was able to see and learn a lot about sales operations, sales processes, sales systems. And so I got to see a lot of the behind the scenes. And as I got more and more comfortable, and as I talked to more people, as I talked to executives, everything was moving towards technology. And I decided to step in front of the desk and go into a sales or performance-based role at Workday.
So a question about that. One of the things that technical people are very familiar with is the constant level of innovation, right? The constant changing. As we speak right now, there's a newer release of the iOS, as well as, for your Mac. So all of a sudden people have all these new features. So I wonder, within sales, right? Like from a sales standpoint, of always having something new to sell, of always having new features, in order to entice the customer. I wonder also, are there drawbacks with that? Because as there are continuous releases and new things come out, there are inevitably components that aren't quite working right. The features don't necessarily deliver in the way that they were designed. How do you approach that as a salesman? Like, trying to get someone interested in software that, that has all this capability, and then a year later, 6 months later, there's a feature that you really want to promote or that they're looking forward to.
Yeah, man, that's a great question, Mark. And honestly, I think back to the premise of this podcast, like, why are we having this conversation is to introduce people into different tech careers and different opportunities. From a sales perspective, me personally, I only want to work for the most innovative, the most forward thinking, the state of the art technology companies. Personally, I think innovation and change is I, table stakes for me as someone who works with large enterprise companies. So the change component is something that I'm very comfortable with. And that might also be, a generational thing. Like I'm a millennial, which I'd imagine some of the listeners are as well. So we are not as risk averse to change. But when it comes to, dealing with that from a sales perspective, I think that's a great thing, honestly, because that speaks to, well, we hope it speaks to the product getting better and the company making the investment from a technology standpoint to improve the customer experience or to improve the operations of the product as well. So for me, change is a positive thing versus, something to be scared of.
And the
I'll be
reason,
curious to get your thoughts on that. What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
so the part of it that brings it to mind, right? So like again, as someone who's in the production of the product or the distribution of the product, there's a set of features, right, that you're really looking forward to developing, and there might be things that you're taking away. But I often see from the side of the customer, right, like there's a bit of confusion if you change the way that you do things, right? So again, I'll just make it really general. I updated my iPhone, and buttons are in different places,
Yes, sir.
and as much as, like you said, people may become used to change, there's also a notion of kind of a mental map you have of how things work. And
For
so
sure.
when something's not exactly where it used to be, there's kind of a learning curve. But as someone who's responsible for, again, selling the product, um, I just wonder about that because sometimes I see specifications, I see online learnings, I see those type of things, and um, that screen is not there anymore, or that's not what that's called anymore. And I just wondered again to kind of make the correlation if that requires you to consistently, be up on your learning or if there's a methodology that you use to actually keep abreast of like how the product is changing as well as
Mhm.
what customers are used to, right? Because I imagine
Yeah.
that your competitors, um, by coming out with new features, create a, well, they're your competitors, so they're competing with you. They're creating new features. But I also would say that when there's just technological change in general, people wonder why that's not in your product. And how, as someone who's responsible for talking to individuals on a day-to-day basis, and you're not responsible for the fact that they move that screen, like how you have to, like what how do you keep up to date with whatever's going on in the technical world, so that you can continue to interface with customers?
Yes, sir. Yeah, this is my passion. Technology is my passion. The industry is my passion. So for me, I'm always reading. I'm always studying this. I'm listening to, other, you know, podcasts, newsletters, news clippings. I even actually write a newsletter on tech culture and people just to help the people that follow me stay abreast to the changes and what does this mean potentially for us as humans and also executives, leaders as well. So for me, I think the best thing that I try to do is just study it myself. And then when it comes to communicating it to an executive or to a leader, I try to simplify it, right? Because some of these things that, our product developers and, UX and UI folks design, they can make it very complicated, right? Like,
Technologists of Color strives to provide a growth platform for African Americans in the technology industry. We help you enter the industry and nurture your career goals. Our core programs focus on connecting, informing, teaching, and collaborating. If you are looking for a community to take your career to the next level, join Technologists of Color. Find us at techsofcolor.org.
Right? Like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
just downloading an update to your iPhone, you know, there's probably thousands of features that they released in that update. But what's important to an executive might be, 10 things. So I just try to simplify and focus on the top 10 things that might be important to their strategic plan. But it starts with me seeking that education and being able to communicate that as well. So that's where my passion comes in. So that's how I try to approach it when it comes to just dealing with the change in the things that are always happening in the technology industry.
So you mentioned how your career progressed to this point.
Yes, sir.
And a question I would ask is if you had to talk to a younger version of yourself, what kind of advice would you give that version of yourself in terms of how they would prepare for the career that you have now?
Man, that's such a great question, man. I think, working in a performance-based role, you're going to experience ups and downs. I think that's one thing I want to communicate to the audience. When you think about getting into sales specifically and technology sales or software sales, there's going to be ups and downs. And for me, I've always been somewhat of an overachiever. I've never really experienced a time period where I felt like I was, you know, quote unquote failing, like up until I got into sales. So if once I understood that there are ups and downs in sales, and the only thing you can control is your level of effort and your desire and your passion and how you show up to work every day. I was able to get a lot more comfortable with the industry and what was transpiring in technology. So the advice I would give to my younger self would be just stay focused, don't give up, don't be discouraged, because there's going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be great days, and then you're going to have some days where you get a call that a contract is not being signed today, and it might be the last day of the quarter, and you're like, it's very frustrating. And some of those things are outside of your control, but ultimately, I would say always believe in yourself. Don't be discouraged, and continue to be in the pursuit. Right, that's the nature of what we do as salespeople, and be passionate too. I think that's one thing that has carried me to where I am today is like truly being curious about the industry, truly being curious about technology, truly being curious about my executives, the people that I'm working with. And I think those are the things that I feel like would carry anyone to my point and beyond.
So when you say curiosity, can you give us an example of how that's been useful in your situation?
Yes, sir. So the big buzzword right now is artificial intelligence, right? And
Okay.
I was hearing about this many years ago, right? Like maybe 2014, 20, maybe 20, yeah, 2014, 2012, I was hearing about artificial intelligence. And I just started studying this, like, just from my own, desire. And lo and behold, 10 years later, that is one of the biggest drivers for why people buy technology. So when it comes to being able to explain what a large language model means or what's the benefits of something like that, and how certain companies can take advantage of these large language models versus others, and the technical debt that they may have, is something that I could really easily explain. And you were talking earlier about like, you know, salespeople versus a more technical role where people might be focused on the code and more of the nuances of the technology. Salespeople, it's important for us to be able to understand, the thought process behind the technology so that we can actually communicate it to an executive that might not necessarily be focused on technology. This might be a CFO who's focused on financials and reporting and compliance, right?
Mhm.
So how do I take, what it means to be, or what it means from a data perspective, or the thoughts behind a large language model, and equate that to, producing a executive dashboard, is something that I think I can be able to explain because I've been curious about the technology, about artificial intelligence many years ago. So that's one way I would say is an example of just being curious in the industry and it actually paying off. Another thing I could give an example of, it had to be like maybe 2016, 2017. I went to an Amazon Web Services Summit. And mind you, I'm a sales guy. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I just went on my leisure. I actually got one of my best friends to go with me. He's also in sales. He's actually an account executive at LinkedIn. And we went to this Amazon Web Services Summit in which it was all developers. Like it was all software engineers, complete. I felt like a fish out of water. I had no idea that it was going to be that type of an event, but I was just curious. Honestly, I knew that they were having it in Atlanta. And I was just curious to go. And I ended up meeting so many different executives, also developers. And we have some of those people are still good friends and a part of my network to this day. But that just speaks to just being curious about the industry, curious about what's going on. And those type of things, that type of curiosity pay off as you progress through your career.
It's interesting that you say that. So Technologists of Color, we make a point to try and get people involved in conferences, for just the reasons that you're talking about, right? So you got the opportunity to network with individuals, and you got in a way to kind of step outside of your direct role, right? But
Absolutely.
witness all this technology that's being utilized. And I don't know if I was at that particular one, but I've definitely attended several AWS summits. And I would say that one of the things about them, as well as, Google Cloud Platform, all these different people who have these things, but I definitely noticed, and this kind of falls into sales, is I could definitely tell when there was a significant amount of money being placed behind new products and introducing us to things.
Mhm.
And it just showed how important it is, right, for we who make the products to have an end result of someone who recognizes what the product does and is yearning to actually utilize the product. And if it's your first time seeing artificial intelligence and watching someone use voice activated technology, if it's your first time watching someone utilize visual technology and they throw up something on the screen, I remember there was a demo, and you're in front of the camera, and it was recognizing this is a face, and then you put an object in front of it, that's a dog, this is a so forth and so on, right? Like every time those kind of landmark things happen, right, it's really exciting, and it opens your mind, right, to what's possible. And I'm quite sure, to what you said, that as a person who's on the front line of trying to communicate this to the customer, it's very important that you understand how it works. So you didn't actually have to create it, but you have to understand how it works. But then you have to communicate that to a person who themselves is the recipient of the technology, and they don't want to hear like maybe large language model, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's having a moment right now. So that probably is going over very well. But there will come a time where there's another set of words that, like, they don't want to hear that. They want to know what it does and how it's going to help them do their job better, how it's going to help them make more money, those type of things. So you mentioned conferences. Are there any other things that you do to exercise your curiosity in order to keep yourself abreast of like what's going on?
Yes, so I'm always interested in, of course, the conferences, but also LinkedIn articles, newsletters. What are my peers involved with, like organizations that are putting on events like Technologists of Color, like, just curating the industry, curating the ecosystem. I'm always trying to tap into that because I know that, leaders like yourself are thinking down the line, right? Like, so even where I might be blind in certain areas where I might not know, what the next 5 to 10 years look like, or I might not even have a network in the space that you may have. I just try to tap into, what's going on so that I could stay on the cutting edge as well. And I think about this a lot in terms of like, outside of work. there's all type of different ecosystems as it relates to venture capital, angel investing, and just skill building. Like I was hearing about these boot camps before they were popular, I really didn't understand, what the utility was for those type of things. But, at the time when I started getting into those type of environments, those type of circles, I understood exactly what the benefit was. And then you look back, you zoom out and you see like, what are the macro trends? There are more people going into these, specialized boot camps, getting certain certifications, and then stepping into the industry, versus people that are going, some are not going to a traditional route to acquire certain jobs. So it's just staying interested in the industry and pursuing the things that you all are putting on, like, mixers, conferences, those type of things. They really pay off as you go through your career, not only from a networking perspective, but also from a thought leadership perspective.
What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that you face in this current climate? Like what are some of the challenges that are out there?
Yes, sir. So of course there's macro trends like related to, just the American economy or the global economy. I mean, there's so much going on right now globally that of course you have just concerns and just, I would say, as it relates to your question, what are the biggest challenges is just the idea of uncertainty, right? Like we don't know what the future holds. We talk about AI, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like? I mean, it's just things are happening so drastically and so quickly that the idea of uncertainty is always there. So that's one big thing. And then also just, what's happening at a macro level. But from an industry perspective, as I think about the industry that I work with and I think about higher education, that industry is changing dramatically as well. Like I just mentioned, there are more opportunities happening that are non-traditional for students to get, certain types of jobs. And so the industry executives that I'm working with, they're concerned about that as well. So when you think about the technology and how it could help them be more efficient, those are the type of things that I can help them navigate because I've literally studied the technology. I've studied the industry. I can have a conversation about these type of things. So those are a couple of things that I think about when it comes to just the macro challenges and what are the things that I think about from a sales perspective.
So you mentioned that it's the higher ed space and then it's enterprise level. And
Yes, sir.
There was a point when the thing about enterprise level technology is that it evolved slowly, I guess was the best way of saying it. Like, like features didn't come out as quickly. There was generational changes in terms of like what people were comfortable with. And, now with there being more rapid change, are you seeing a situation where because of what's available as well as who is currently like what they're personally familiar with, that there is more change in the enterprise space in terms of, I know there used to be a saying based on the stakeholder, right? Like if we convert over to whatever it is, right? Like the whole office is migrating to this new product, right?
Yes.
That is a command that has come down on high. We just got to bear with it and use it. But I feel as though because people are walking around with technology in their hands, that they interface really quickly with, an ugly interface doesn't go over as well as it used to. Something that doesn't perform in the way that they're used to because they have something in their hand that performs like that. So how do you deal with customer expectations? And how do you relay that back to the individuals who kind of, like, again, you're talking to customers, they're telling you about things that would drive sales. How do you communicate that back to developers or people on the technical side in order to complete that loop to make sure that the new features that are published are something that somebody actually wants to buy.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier about me being on the front lines. And so I have a lot of opportunity to connect with customers. I have a lot of opportunity to connect with my internal team as well. Like when we talk about, the releases that, some of the product managers may be, building, and some of the software engineers may be coding, we're all very collaborative. But as it relates to, you know, how do I communicate this? What you mentioned earlier about like change, right? And how do you get comfortable with change? You mentioned migration as well. Like that's a technical term that is so scary for people who have experienced some migrations. But if you haven't experienced an migration, you might think that's like, just like an iPhone update, which is pretty non-invasive. But that part is so critical because there are so many people, and especially executives, who have done migrations in the past that have been challenging. They've spent years and millions of dollars trying to migrate, from one system to the next. But I mentioned earlier about how I only want to work for the most innovative companies. And there's a reason for that, because they care about the customer experience. They care about, migrations and how do we get a customer from this experience to the next experience in a way that's feasible. It's non-invasive. You think about just your iPhone update. You might have been able to do that overnight. Like just, as you're sleeping, plug your phone up and it automatically downloads your software, and you wake up in the morning with a totally new interface. And that might, cause some frustration, but it also could cause a ton of benefit and a ton of value. So those are the type of things that I try to think about as it relates to what kind of companies would I even decide to work with, because that's important. If you don't have a focus on the customer, it makes your job as a salesperson so much harder. So those are the type of things that I try to think about, even as it relates to which companies I'm going to partner with.
In looking at that change, looking at the landscape of companies and things you like to partner with, the type of technology you want to be curious about, again, going back to AI, when interfacing with customers, right, there is obviously an optimistic outlook on all the features and how they'll make their jobs easier and all the tasks that it will perform that again will make us more money. But also currently there's this idea that in some way AI will replace someone. So
Yes.
Is there a notion when it comes to adding new features that may have been requested by one group of individuals that another group within that same, so you're delivering your product, it's an HR product, and perhaps the people who are responsible for putting in their hours or doing certain things, that there are things that they would like to do. But on the financial side or someone else who has to interface with the product, they're like, I don't really like that because that's cutting into my job, right? Like you're making something automatic, or you're making something, that's part of what is in my list of responsibilities that just got integrated into the software. And, I see that as partially job security. So do you run into that from a customer standpoint where people are reticent
For sure.
for there to be certain things changed because they see that as how they get paid, or how that's part of what they bring to the table that you now are telling them that is going to be in the software?
Yes, sir. We run into that all the time. And that's not specific to Workday. That's specific to technology and just the industry as a whole. There's always going to be pushback on change. I think that the more comfortable you are with that as a salesperson or just as a technologist, the better off you'll be. And in fact, I like to think of it in this way. Of course, there's some things that might be invasive to what they do today, like especially some of the more tactical things. And as we think about artificial intelligence, a lot of the things that we spend a lot of time on are going to be, leveraged, are going to be used by artificial intelligence to do those things more efficiently, more effectively. But as it relates to, how we think about our jobs, think about if you were able to spend more time on the strategic work versus some of the more tactical tasks. Like as we think about, HR, that using the example that you mentioned earlier, like entering hours, there might be a manager that has to verify that, every hour that this person entered is correct. That probably takes so much time. But if you could leverage, artificial intelligence or a system to recognize the variances, that allows you to do more strategic things, like focus on, the culture of your institution or your organization, right? Focus on, how do we, retain our employees? How do we drive the experience for not only our employees, but also our customers, right? So freeing them up from these tactical things actually allows them to do more strategic work, which makes them more valuable and makes them feel more fulfilled, ultimately makes them more happy or happier.
What I got out of that is that you bring your sales to it and you accentuate the positive. Would that be a good way of saying an approach, right? Okay. All right, good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's always
So,
there. I can't thank you, man.
no, that's an important notion of, again, like I asked, like how do you work yourself out of that situation? And that's exactly what you did. You accentuated positive. You didn't spend a lot of time on saying, hey, you might lose your job because we don't do X, Y, and Z. We're gonna hone in on all the benefit that this might bring.
Yes, sir.
We started by discussing, like, there's a lot of comments, right? So you're doing podcasting, you are doing one-on-one business coaching. Like, how does all of that fit together in terms of, are they contradictory? Do they bolster one another? Like, how do you fit all those things together and integrate those into your life and possibly use one skill in another arena?
Yeah, man, this is my passion. So I don't think of it as like a conflict of interest, because I would do this regardless, if I worked for Workday or if I worked for X, Y, and Z. Helping my community, helping the community is something that is just ingrained in me. So of course those things are actually complementary, because I'm actually studying, I'm actually learning the industry, and I'm communicating that to people that I can help via coaching or via mentorship. These are things that, I'm passionate about. So I think of it as more of a strength versus a weakness, or something that's detracting me from my ultimate goal. And if you look at the track record of my career, some would say that I've been able to be successful while doing that, just based on the results. So I don't plan to stop that. In fact, I plan to ramp it up, because I think, as we think about scaling and just the global impact that technology can make, it requires us to be more of thought leaders, right? It requires us to speak and help others get on board with what the future holds. And I think that's something I'm really passionate about. So you'll see me do my podcast. You'll see me do newsletters. You'll see me talk about certain things on social media platforms, because it's important. It's important for the community to understand what's happening and what are the benefits, what's the values that we could take from this. And that's something I'm just really passionate about.
So we mentioned a lot about passion, right? And so, like, you're picking an area where you feel an affinity, where you have passion for. Can you speak to not the, let's say, the innate qualities that lead you to go into sales, but possibly some things that you actually had to learn, like maybe some, some frameworks, some strategies. I heard of like, ABC, always be selling, or something like that. Like, approaches, kind of, again, like in a technical format, people might be familiar with like the different languages that they had to learn, the approaches that they had to learn. Like, were there structured things that somebody who's like, hey, I feel like I'm charismatic. I feel like I could spend some time talking to customers, but I'm not sure the nuts and bolts of how I sell, right? So I might be coming from having been on the technical side, So I understand our product very well,
Yes.
but I don't know how I would sell. So is there anything in
Yes.
there that you had to learn?
Oh man, for sure. I think, of course, there's some soft skills that you have to learn, like, dealing with rejection. Like, you're going to get told no a lot, but
Mhm.
how do you navigate that from a human perspective? Like, how do you not let that beat you down? But then also, like, how do you sell through that as well? Like, the first no, or someone telling you no, they might be telling you no to how you're presenting it. But if you know, reframe, you know, why this is meaningful to them, they might be, a little bit more interested in what you have to say. But then there's also some hard skills to learn too. And some of the frameworks that I like to leverage is the Challenger Sale. It's actually a book. You can pick it up, on Amazon. And it's about, um, you know, the different types of ways of selling, right? There's like 5 or 6 different ways of selling. And it's actually one of the first books I read when entering into sales. And I think it helped round out my perspective. The other book or resource that I would recommend is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And these are
Mhm.
more of, tactical things that you could leverage, but they're strategic in a way too, because they're not talking about the technology and just, the software per se, but it's talking about how to present a particular message. In fact, I'm writing a book myself about, some of the things that we can do to help younger people learn how to sell, not even younger people, but people that are transitioning into software, how to sell, because it is a skill that I believe that anyone can acquire, regardless if you're charismatic or not. I've seen some of the best salespeople be, software engineers or people that come from finance that are not necessarily the most charismatic or the most dynamic from a speaking perspective, but they have a certain skill set that's meaningful and that's valuable to an executive, that they can, properly communicate the value of a software. And that's, something that I'm working on. And hopefully I'll have it released by January 1st, actually.
Are there any keys to, because you're in front of this often and you have that sales background, that make
Yes.
it easier for you to kind of surface content, like, to tell people about something you're already doing instead of making up something new, right? Um, so that you're ready for your next opportunity, because people know who Chance Mack is. They know he's good at selling. I've never seen you do this a day in your life, but I've watched you on social media. I
Mhm.
if it's in a working environment, I've seen your LinkedIn, and just
Right.
by the things that you've surfaced and the amount of repetition that I have of seeing your face and things you've tied to, that might lead me to believe a certain thing. So how do you make that easier on yourself when you do something like that?
Yeah, I think it's just being, kind of to the theme of this conversation, is just being curious. And then the biggest thing is just being yourself, right? Like, if you allow the industry or like the traditions to govern who you are, you'll never be successful, because you'll never measure up to what the industry standard is, right? Or at least for me, I can't say you'll never be, but for me, I found that I tried to, um, measure up to the industry standard when I was younger in my career, and I say y'all. I got a southern drawl. Like, I didn't,
Mhm.
there's different things about me that are not traditional, right? And I think that those are strengths. My passion for the industry, my ability to communicate, technology and where the future is heading. Some people say, like, why are you doing that? You should be more conservative. But I think overall, what I'm trying to do is educate my prospective customers, my team, and those are my passions. So that's some of the things that I would give people, is just, be curious, be yourself, and lastly, take chances.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Chance Mack telling us we should be taking some chances. All right. Chance, I thank you for doing this interview, for enlightening everyone about what it is you do, giving them advice on how they could approach this. For anyone who's interested in changing a career, anyone who's looking to go into sales from the beginning, I hope that people will use your social media contact information to reach out.
Absolutely. So the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. My name is Chance Mack, last name Mack, M-A-C-K. Also, I'm on Instagram if you want to find me there. Also have a website, chancemack.com. Those are the main platforms that I'm on. But if you search Chance Mack, you can find me on Google, and it'll direct you to all of the different places to find me. But the best way to connect is on LinkedIn.
Thank you, and for letting us have the opportunity to get to know you.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Click the subscribe button